The morning sun shone softly on the glass windows of the Harrington mansion, a house so large that people passing by often stopped to stare. Inside, the atmosphere was busy. Maids polished the silver, gardeners trimmed the hedges outside, and cooks prepared a luxurious breakfast. Among all these workers was Rosa, a young black maid who moved quietly from room to room with a feather duster in her hand and a look of quiet determination on her face. She had worked here for almost 2 years, never once drawing attention to herself. She knew her place. To her, this job was not about pride, it was about survival. Her mother was sick back home in a small neighborhood, and her younger siblings depended on the little money she sent every month. Rosa lived for them. The Harrington family hardly noticed her. Mr. Harrington, the billionaire who owned the house, spent most of his days in meetings or on the phone shouting orders. His presence alone made people nervous. He was known for his strictness and his obsession with control. Everything in his mansion had to be perfect, from the shine of his shoes to the placement of his expensive cars in the garage. Among those cars was his favorite, a bright red Ferrari that he treated like a crown jewel. The staff whispered that no one, not even the chauffeur, was allowed to touch it without his permission. Rosa often admired that car from a distance, but never once thought she would be close to it. It was just another symbol of the life she could never reach. While the billionaire's daughter, Emily, ran around the garden in designer clothes, Rosa's own siblings barely had enough to eat. Yet Rosa never let jealousy enter her heart. She simply focused on her work, grateful that her job kept food on the table for her family. That morning seemed ordinary until a scream echoed through the halls. Rosa froze, her duster slipping from her hand. She rushed toward the sound, her heart racing, and found the source in Emily's room. The young girl lay collapsed on the floor, her face pale, her breaths short and sharp. The nanny screamed for help, while the other maids crowded around the door, unsure of what to do. Chaos filled the room. Someone shouted for the chauffeur, but he had gone to pick up supplies and would not be back for an hour. Another staff member tried calling the family doctor, but he was stuck in heavy traffic. Seconds felt like hours as the little girl's condition worsened. Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she watched Emily's small body struggling for breath. The other staff seemed frozen, their fear of Mr. Harrington stronger than their concern for the child. They whispered nervously, waiting for instructions, unwilling to take a step that might cost them their jobs. Rosa looked at Emily and thought of her own siblings. She imagined her little brother gasping for breath with no one willing to move. Her heart clenched. She could not stand still. She knelt beside Emily, her hands trembling, and whispered, "It's going to be okay, I promise." Then she looked out the window and saw the Ferrari gleaming in the driveway, the keys resting on the table nearby where Mr. Harrington had left them the night before. Fear gripped her. She knew what that car meant to her boss. She knew what people would say if they saw her driving it. A poor maid behind the wheel of a billionaire's most prized possession. It was unthinkable. It could mean the end of her job, maybe even worse. But when she looked back at Emily, pale and weak, she realized she had no choice. This was not about fear or consequences. This was about life. Her decision came in a rush of courage she didn't know she had. She grabbed the keys, shocking the other maids, and shouted for someone to help her lift Emily. The nanny gasped, "You can't do this. He'll fire you." But Rosa ignored her. With surprising strength, she picked up Emily and carried her down the hall. The other staff trailed behind, watching in disbelief. When Rosa stepped outside, the sun hit her face, and for the first time, she didn't care who was watching. She opened the door of the Ferrari, carefully placed Emily in the seat, and buckled her in. Her hands shook as she slid behind the wheel. She had never driven such a powerful car before. The leather smelled of wealth, and the dashboard glowed with lights she didn't fully understand. For a brief moment, doubt filled her mind. But Emily let out a weak moan, pulling Rosa back into focus. She started the engine. The roar of the Ferrari filled the driveway, startling the staff and causing some to cover their mouths in shock. Then Rosa pressed her foot on the pedal and drove out of the mansion gates, her heart pounding like a drum. The city streets blurred around her. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every second felt like a battle. Drivers honked as she sped past them, but she didn't slow down. She remembered the shortcuts from years of walking these streets, and she took them without hesitation. Red lights flashed, pedestrians shouted, but Rosa didn't stop. She whispered prayers under her breath, begging for Emily's life to be saved. Beside her, Emily coughed weakly, her little body shivering. Rosa reached over with one hand to gently hold Emily's arm. "Stay with me, sweetheart. We're almost there," she whispered. Her eyes stung with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had to stay strong for Emily, for her siblings, for the promise she silently made to herself that no child should ever suffer alone. By the time she pulled into the hospital's driveway, her entire body was trembling. Nurses and security guards rushed toward the Ferrari, shocked to see a maid in uniform driving such an expensive car. Rosa didn't stop to explain. She threw open her door, lifted Emily in her arms again, and shouted for help. Doctors and nurses ran to meet her, quickly placing Emily on a stretcher and wheeling her inside. Rosa followed, her chest heaving, her mind spinning with fear of what would happen next. For the first time since she made her daring choice, Rosa allowed herself to breathe. She didn't know what the doctors would say, she didn't know what Mr. Harrington would do when he found out, but one thing was certain: she had done what she had to do. She had chosen life over fear, courage over silence. As she stood in the hospital hallway, surrounded by strangers staring at her with wide eyes, Rosa whispered to herself, "Please, let her be okay." Rosa sat in the driver's seat of the Ferrari, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The sound of the engine was louder than anything she had ever heard before. It felt like the whole city could hear it. She had never been in a car this expensive, let alone driven one. The leather seats felt strange beneath her simple maid's uniform, and the bright red hood of the car stretched out before her like the wings of a beast ready to fly. She could feel the eyes of the other staff back at the mansion still on her, even though she was already racing down the road. She imagined their whispers, their gasps of horror, their fear of what Mr. Harrington would do when he found out. But Rosa did not dare look back. All she could think about was Emily lying weakly in the seat beside her. Emily's small hand rested limply against her chest, her face pale and her lips dry. Every now and then, she let out a faint cough or a weak moan that made Rosa's heart twist. Rosa leaned toward her and whispered, "Hold on, sweetheart. Just a little longer. You're going to be okay." She did not know if Emily could hear her, but she hoped her voice carried enough comfort to keep her awake. The city was alive with chaos. It was morning rush hour, and cars filled the streets in long lines of traffic. Horns blared, and people shouted at one another through open windows. Drivers leaned on their horns angrily when Rosa cut across lanes, but she didn't care. She pushed the Ferrari harder, its engine roaring as it weaved through the mess of vehicles. People turned their heads in shock, not only because of the bright red car but because of the woman behind the wheel. A maid, still in her work apron, was driving a machine worth more than their houses. Some even pulled out their phones to record what they were seeing, their eyes wide in disbelief. But Rosa had no time to worry about what strangers thought. Her eyes darted between the road and Emily, her chest tight with fear. She prayed silently with every turn of the wheel. Her mind flashed with images of her own siblings, especially her little brother, who often fell sick because they couldn't always afford medicine. She remembered the helplessness she had felt watching him suffer. That same helplessness rose in her again, but this time she refused to let it win. The hospital was still several streets away, but Rosa knew she had to reach it quickly. Every second mattered. She sped past a traffic light, ignoring the red glow above her. A police officer standing on the corner blew a whistle and shouted, but Rosa kept going. She couldn't stop. Not now. She felt sweat drip down her forehead, her palms slippery against the steering wheel, but she tightened her grip. Emily let out a small whimper, and Rosa quickly reached over with one hand to brush a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Stay with me, Emily," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We're almost there. Don't close your eyes yet." The Ferrari roared louder as Rosa pressed harder on the gas. The sound echoed off the tall buildings around her, drawing stares from pedestrians. A group of teenagers on the sidewalk cheered as the car flew past, thinking it was some kind of thrill ride. To them, it was just excitement. To Rosa, it was a desperate fight against time. Finally, she saw the large blue H sign up ahead. Relief washed over her, but she knew it wasn't over yet. She swung the car sharply into the hospital driveway, the tires screeching against the pavement. Nurses and security guards turned their heads, shocked to see the Ferrari rushing in. Some of them stepped back as Rosa slammed the car into park, jumped out, and hurried to Emily's side. She opened the door quickly, scooping Emily into her arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Her heart pounded as she ran toward the sliding glass doors of the emergency room, shouting, "Help! Please, someone help her!" Her voice cracked with desperation. At first, the people inside stared in confusion. They saw a maid carrying a child in her arms and couldn't quite understand what was happening. Some noticed the Ferrari parked outside and exchanged bewildered glances. But within seconds, nurses rushed forward, guiding Rosa toward a stretcher. They carefully lifted Emily out of her arms and began checking her pulse, her breathing, her eyes. A doctor in a white coat appeared, barking orders for oxygen and for fluids. Rosa stood there, breathless, watching as they wheeled Emily into the treatment area. Her legs trembled, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. She pressed her hands together tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. "Please, please save her. Please let her be okay." One of the nurses looked back at Rosa, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Are you family?" she asked. Rosa shook her head quickly. "No. I'm just the maid. But I had to bring her. There was no one else." The nurse's expression softened. She gave Rosa a small nod before hurrying after the doctors. Rosa sank into one of the plastic chairs in the waiting area, her chest still rising and falling rapidly. The adrenaline that had carried her through the drive began to fade, leaving only exhaustion and fear. She buried her face in her hands, whispering again, "Please let her live. Please." Around her, people continued to stare. Some were whispering to each other, trying to piece together what they had just seen. A woman leaned over to her husband and said, "Did you see that? She came in driving a Ferrari. In that uniform." Another man shook his head in disbelief. "That must be Harrington's car. Oh, he's not going to like this. That poor girl, she doesn't know what's coming." Rosa heard their words, and her stomach twisted. She knew they were right. Mr. Harrington would be furious. To him, that car was his pride, and she had just taken it without permission. She could lose her job. She could lose everything. But even as fear filled her, she refused to regret her choice. If she hadn't acted, Emily might not even have made it here alive. Minutes felt like hours as Rosa sat in the waiting area, her eyes fixed on the door the doctors had disappeared through. Every sound in the hospital, the beeping machines, the hurried footsteps, the murmured conversation seemed distant. All she could think about was Emily. She didn't care about herself anymore. She didn't care about the Ferrari, her job, or even what punishment waited for her. All that mattered was that the little girl lived. Finally, a nurse came back into the waiting room. Rosa jumped to her feet, her heart pounding. The nurse gave her a small smile and said, "She's stable." You brought her just in time. Tears filled Rosa's eyes, and she covered her mouth with her hands to keep from crying out. Relief washed over her like a wave, so powerful it almost knocked her over. She whispered, "Thank God, thank God." The nurse nodded kindly and then walked away to continue her work. Rosa sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Emily was alive. That was all that mattered. But deep down, Rosa knew this was not the end of her struggle. Any moment now, Mr. Harrington would find out what had happened. He would learn that his Ferrari had been driven through the city by a maid. He would learn that his daughter had been saved not by his wealth or his staff, but by the courage of someone he hardly noticed. Rosa closed her eyes, preparing herself for whatever storm was about to come. Back at the Harrington mansion, the atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as a morning of quiet routines had turned into panic and whispers that spread from the kitchen to the long marble halls. The maids huddled together, their voices low but urgent. The gardener peeked inside from the backyard, confused by the commotion. The butler stood stiffly near the entrance, unsure of what to do. All eyes were on the giant staircase as the heavy sound of footsteps echoed downward. It was Mr. Harrington. He came down the stairs with his phone in hand, his face twisted with anger. "Where is my car?" he barked, his deep voice shaking the very walls. No one dared answer at first. They looked at one another, hoping someone else would speak. Finally, the nanny stepped forward, trembling. "Sir, it was Rosa. She took the Ferrari. She took Miss Emily to the hospital." For a moment, Mr. Harrington's face went blank, as if he could not believe what he was hearing. Then his jaw tightened, and his fists clenched. "She did what?" His voice thundered across the room. Some of the staff flinched. The thought of someone touching his Ferrari was shocking enough, but a maid driving it through the city? It felt like an insult, an unforgivable act. The butler cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, the child was unwell," perhaps Rosa acted, but Mr. Harrington cut him off sharply. "I don't care what she thought. That car is worth more than her life's earnings. How dare she?" He stopped mid-sentence when his phone rang. The name of the hospital flashed across the screen. His face hardened as he answered. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Mr. Harrington, your daughter is here. She's stable now. She was brought in just in time. A young woman arrived with her in a red Ferrari. If she had not acted quickly, the situation could have been far worse." Mr. Harrington froze. For a second, his anger melted into confusion. His grip on the phone loosened, and his eyes darted to the floor. He swallowed hard, trying to process the words. Emily was safe. Emily was alive. The image of her lying unconscious on the floor flashed through his mind, and his chest tightened. He whispered into the phone, "Thank you," before hanging up. The staff waited, holding their breath. They expected him to explode again, to call the police, to demand Rosa be punished. Instead, Mr. Harrington's face shifted into something they had rarely seen before: worry. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and stormed out of the mansion. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the halls, leaving the staff stunned. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Rosa sat quietly in the waiting area. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair messy from the frantic drive, but she didn't care. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her lips moving silently in prayer. People around her continued to glance in her direction. Some still whispered about the Ferrari parked outside, but Rosa hardly noticed. She was too focused on the door that led to Emily's room. Every time a nurse walked by, Rosa's heart skipped a beat, hoping for more news. Her mind replayed the drive over and over: the honking cars, the flashing lights, Emily's weak voice. She wondered if she had done everything right, if she had been fast enough. She had never felt so powerless in her life, and yet, she had also never felt so certain about a decision. She would do it again if it meant saving Emily. The sound of hurried footsteps pulled Rosa from her thoughts. She looked up and saw Mr. Harrington storming through the hospital lobby. His expensive suit caught the light, and his tall frame seemed to command the space. People moved aside as he walked, whispering his name. Everyone knew who he was. Rosa's stomach dropped. She lowered her head quickly, her heart racing. She knew this was the moment she had been dreading. Mr. Harrington's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Rosa. She looked so small sitting there, her head bowed, her hands trembling. His first instinct was anger. He remembered the sight of his empty garage, the image of his Ferrari being driven by someone he considered just the help. He felt the sting of humiliation at the thought of people in the city seeing his car in the hands of a maid. But then, his eyes softened as he remembered the words from the hospital staff. Without Rosa, his daughter might not even be alive right now. He walked toward her slowly, his footsteps heavy. The room seemed to fall silent. Rosa felt the weight of his presence as he stopped in front of her. She didn't dare look up. Her voice came out shaky as she whispered, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I just had to save her." Her eyes filled with tears. She expected him to shout, to fire her on the spot, maybe even call the police. She braced herself for the worst. But Mr. Harrington did not shout. He stood there, looking at the maid who had risked everything for his daughter, and something stirred inside him. He realized that while his staff had been paralyzed by fear, Rosa had been the only one brave enough to act. She had chosen his daughter's life over her own security. That was something money could not buy. "Look at me," he said quietly. Rosa lifted her eyes slowly, her vision blurred by tears. She saw a man whose face still carried sternness, but behind it, there was something else, a flicker of gratitude, a softness she had never seen before. "You saved my daughter," he said, his voice low but steady. "When no one else moved, you did. I cannot ignore that." The people around them watched in surprise. No one had ever heard Mr. Harrington speak in such a tone. Rosa blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She simply nodded, her tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Before he could say more, a doctor appeared from the hallway. "Mr. Harrington, your daughter is asking for you." His voice carried a sense of relief. Mr. Harrington nodded and followed the doctor, but before leaving, he glanced back at Rosa. His eyes lingered for a moment, as if silently acknowledging her courage. Rosa sat back in her chair, her chest rising and falling as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The man she feared most had not punished her. Instead, he had spoken words she never expected to hear. Still, she knew this was only the beginning. His reaction had shocked the people around them, but what came next was uncertain. Would he truly forgive her? Would he keep her job? Or was this just a moment of softness that would disappear once the reality of what she had done sank in? In the room down the hall, Emily lay with an oxygen mask gently resting on her face. Her color was returning, her breathing steadier. When Mr. Harrington entered, she turned her head weakly and smiled. "Daddy," she whispered. His heart melted as he sat beside her, holding her small hand. For the first time in a long while, he realized how fragile life could be. All his wealth, all his power, meant nothing compared to this simple moment of seeing his daughter safe. Back in the waiting area, Rosa leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "Thank you, God." She knew her journey was far from over, but for now, she found comfort in one simple truth: Emily was alive. Mr. Harrington stood in the hospital room, his tall figure casting a shadow across the bed where Emily lay resting. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound for a moment, steady and calming. Emily's small hand was still in his, and he kept his eyes fixed on her fragile frame. For years, he had been consumed with business deals, meetings, and protecting his empire, but at this moment, all of that felt meaningless. His daughter's soft smile was worth more than every car, every house, and every deal he had ever made. As he sat there, his mind kept circling back to Rosa. The image of her sitting nervously in the waiting room played over in his thoughts. She had looked so small, so afraid, yet she had done what even his closest staff and advisors couldn't do. She had acted. For a man like Harrington, who valued loyalty and courage above all else in his business, that meant something. Still, a part of him wrestled with pride. His Ferrari was his symbol of success, and seeing it driven through the city by a maid was something he never imagined. But no matter how much pride he held onto, it could not erase the fact that without Rosa, Emily might not be alive. Emily opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "Daddy." He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I'm here, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice carrying a gentleness the staff at the mansion had never heard. Emily's lips curved into a weak smile. "Rosa. Rosa saved me. She was so brave." The child's words pierced his heart deeper than anything else. If even his daughter saw Rosa as a hero, then how could he see her as anything less? Moments later, the doctor entered the room with a clipboard in his hands. "Mr. Harrington, your daughter will be fine. She needs rest and care, but the quick action of the woman who brought her here made all the difference. You should thank her." Harrington nodded silently, his gaze drifting back to Emily, who had already fallen asleep again. When he finally stepped out of the room, his eyes immediately searched for Rosa. She was still in the waiting area, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked like she was waiting for judgment, like a student about to hear her punishment from a strict teacher. Around her, people whispered and glanced curiously, expecting to see her scolded or dragged away. Harrington walked slowly toward her, each step measured, his expression unreadable. The room grew quieter as he stopped in front of her. Rosa stood up quickly, bowing her head. "Sir," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I know I had no right to touch your car. I know it was wrong. But I couldn't let her." Her voice broke, and tears welled in her eyes. She lowered her gaze, bracing herself for anger. But Harrington surprised everyone. Instead of shouting, instead of raising his voice, he spoke calmly. "You don't need to apologize, Rosa. You saved my daughter's life." The words hung in the air like a shockwave. The nurses nearby paused in their work, and even the people waiting for their loved ones turned to stare. Rosa's eyes widened, unsure if she had heard correctly. She looked up slowly, meeting his gaze. His eyes, usually sharp and cold, were softer now, touched with something rare gratitude. Rosa's lips parted, but no words came out. For so long, she had been invisible, overlooked, treated as if her worth was tied only to the dust she swept and the floors she polished. To hear the billionaire himself thank her felt unreal. She whispered, "I only did what anyone would have done, sir." "No," Harrington said firmly, shaking his head. "Not anyone. Everyone else froze. Everyone else waited. You acted. That took courage." The weight of his words filled the room, and Rosa's tears spilled freely. She nodded quickly, unable to stop her emotions. The people watching began to murmur among themselves, astonished by the sight of the powerful billionaire praising his maid so openly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, handing it to her. "Wipe your tears, Rosa. You should hold your head high. You have nothing to be ashamed of." She hesitated, then took it with trembling hands, whispering, "Thank you, sir." The atmosphere in the hospital lobby shifted. Where there had been tension and fear, Now there was admiration. People began to smile at Rosa, some even giving her small nods of respect. For the first time, she was not just the maid. She was the woman who had saved a child's life. Harrington turned to the nurse's station. Make sure her information is taken down. She'll be listed as the one responsible for saving my daughter. The nurse scribbled it quickly, her eyes wide with surprise. Rosa shook her head quickly, embarrassed. No, sir, please. I don't want credit. I just wanted her to live. He looked back at her, his voice firm but kind. Sometimes, Rosa, courage deserves recognition, whether you ask for it or not. He walked a few steps away, then paused and turned back to her. His voice dropped, low enough that only she could hear. I owe you more than words. I will not forget this. Then, without waiting for her reply, he walked down the hall toward his daughter's room again. Rosa stood there frozen, clutching the handkerchief in her hands. She felt the stares of everyone around her, but for once, she did not feel small. She felt seen. She felt like her actions had meant something more than just duty. She sat back down, her heart still racing, replaying his words over and over, "You saved my daughter's life." As evening fell, Rosa remained at the hospital, unwilling to leave until she knew Emily was completely safe. She sat quietly, watching families come and go, listening to the sound of nurses calling out names. She thought about her own family, her mother and siblings who had no idea what had happened today. She imagined telling them, though she knew they would probably think it was a dream. After all, who would believe that a poor maid had driven a billionaire's Ferrari through the city and been thanked by him for it? Hours later, Harrington came back into the waiting area. This time, his expression was calmer, almost thoughtful. He walked up to Rosa again. Emily is sleeping peacefully now. The doctors say she will recover fully. Relief washed over Rosa, and she smiled through her tears. Thank God, she whispered. Harrington studied her for a moment, then said quietly, when I first heard what you did, I was furious. My pride blinded me. But today I realized something important: my car can be replaced. My daughter cannot. And you understood that before I did. Rosa looked down, shaking her head humbly. I didn't think, sir. I just acted. I couldn't let her suffer. And that, he said slowly, is why I owe you more than I can ever repay. The people nearby exchanged astonished looks again. No one had ever heard the billionaire speak this way to anyone, let alone a maid. But Harrington meant every word. For years, he had surrounded himself with people who obeyed out of fear, people who valued his wealth more than his humanity. And yet, here was Rosa, a woman with nothing, who had risked everything out of pure courage and compassion. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He no longer saw her as the help. He saw her as the reason his daughter was alive. He saw her as someone who had more heart than all the expensive things he owned. Rosa lowered her head again, whispering, I only did what was right. And that, he replied firmly, is why you will never be forgotten in this house again. The hospital lobby fell silent once more, but this time it was not with fear. It was with respect, with admiration, and with a sense that something extraordinary had just happened. Rosa sat back down, overwhelmed, while Harrington walked away, his shoulders no longer as heavy with anger but lighter with gratitude. In the quiet of her heart, Rosa knew that no matter what tomorrow brought, nothing could erase what had happened today. She had saved a life. She had touched the heart of a man who many believed had none. And though she could not see the future, she felt that this moment was only the beginning of a change she could never have imagined. The next morning, the Harrington mansion was unusually quiet. The staff moved about with nervous energy, whispering among themselves about what had happened the day before. Some still could not believe Rosa had actually taken the Ferrari. Others whispered in awe about how she had saved Emily's life. The tension in the air was thick because no one knew what Mr. Harrington would do now. His pride, his rules, and his reputation were all tied up in that car, yet his daughter owed her life to the maid who dared to break every boundary. Rosa walked through the doors of the mansion slowly. Her steps were heavy, and her eyes were filled with both relief and dread. She had stayed at the hospital most of the night, refusing to leave until Emily was declared completely stable. When the doctor finally said the girl would recover, Rosa thanked him quietly and made her way back to the house. She expected the worst. In her heart, she believed yesterday's words of gratitude from Mr. Harrington were only temporary, spoken in the heat of emotion. Today, she thought, would be the day reality returned, and she would be sent away with nothing but shame. The staff watched her carefully as she entered. Some gave her sympathetic looks, others avoided her eyes, not wanting to be associated with her. Rosa didn't blame them. They all feared Mr. Harrington's temper. She kept her head down, walked into the dining hall where she was told to go, and waited quietly. Moments later, Mr. Harrington appeared. He wore his usual sharp suit, his presence filling the room. Everyone fell silent the instant he walked in. Rosa's heart pounded so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. She held her breath as he stopped in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the staff before settling on her. "Everyone, gather here," he said in his commanding voice. The staff quickly formed a line, standing straight, their eyes lowered. Rosa stood at the end, trembling but trying to remain calm. Mr. Harrington's expression was unreadable as he looked at them. "Yesterday," he began, "something happened in this house that will never be forgotten. My daughter nearly lost her life. While all of you froze in fear, one person acted." His eyes turned to Rosa. "She risked everything to save Emily. She even took my car, something none of you would dare to do, not out of disrespect, but out of courage." The staff gasped quietly. Many exchanged surprised looks. No one had expected him to speak this way. "She made a choice," Harrington continued. "A choice that most of you would never have dared to make. And because of that choice, my daughter is alive today. Rosa is not a thief. She is a hero." The words echoed across the hall, leaving the staff stunned. Rosa's eyes widened, tears filling them as she stared at him in disbelief. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Mr. Harrington walked closer to her, his tone firm but softer than before. "Rosa, you will no longer be treated as invisible in this house. You are not just the help. You are someone I respect deeply." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "From today onward, you are not a maid. You are family." The staff gasped again, louder this time. Rosa's knees felt weak. She pressed her hands to her mouth, unable to stop the tears that streamed down her face. She shook her head, whispering, "Sir, no. I don't deserve this. I was only doing what was right." Harrington looked at her seriously. "And that is exactly why you do deserve this." He turned back to the staff. "From now on, Rosa will not clean your messes. She will not stand in the background. She will pursue her dream of becoming a nurse, and I will pay for her education in full. This house will support her, because she supported us when we needed her most." The staff clapped softly at first, then louder, though some were still in shock. For years, they had feared this man, and now they were watching him change before their eyes. Rosa fell to her knees, overwhelmed. "Thank you, sir. Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Harrington bent down slightly, lifting her to her feet. "Hold your head high, Rosa. You earned this." Later that day, Emily returned home from the hospital, smiling weakly but already recovering. The first person she asked for when she entered the mansion was Rosa. "Where's Rosa?" she said, her voice soft but full of excitement. When Rosa appeared, Emily ran to her, wrapping her arms around her tightly. "You're my hero," the little girl whispered. Rosa hugged her back, tears in her eyes, whispering, "No, sweetheart. You're the strong one." That evening, the family sat down for dinner. For the first time, Rosa was invited to sit at the table, not serve it. She hesitated at first, feeling out of place among the fine dishes and silverware, but Emily grabbed her hand and pulled her into the chair beside her. Harrington watched the scene quietly, a faint smile touching his lips. He realized that his daughter had found someone to look up to, someone who showed her what true bravery looked like. As they ate, Harrington raised his glass and spoke. "This family was built on wealth and power, but yesterday reminded me that none of it matters without love and courage. Rosa reminded me of that. From now on, this house will not just be a mansion, it will be a home." The words touched everyone present, including the staff who stood around the edges of the room. They realized that the billionaire who once cared only for appearances was now a man who valued heart above everything else. The Ferrari sat quietly in the garage that night, its shiny red surface reflecting the soft light. For years, it had been a symbol of status, untouchable and admired from a distance. But now, it carried a new meaning. To Harrington, it was no longer just a car. It was a reminder of the moment his daughter was saved, the moment he realized courage could come from the most unexpected place. Rosa, lying in her small room that night, stared at the ceiling with tears of gratitude. She thought of her mother and siblings, imagining their faces when they would hear the news that her life had changed forever. She whispered a prayer of thanks, not just for Emily's life, but for the chance to finally be seen, respected, and valued. The next morning, the staff began treating her differently. They greeted her with smiles, some even apologizing for the way they had ignored her before. Rosa remained humble, reminding them that she was still the same person, just someone who had been given an opportunity. But in her heart, she knew everything had changed. Emily often followed Rosa around, asking her to read stories, play games, or simply sit with her in the garden. The bond between them grew stronger every day, a bond built not on status but on love and trust. Harrington, watching from a distance, found peace in knowing his daughter had someone like Rosa by her side. The story of the maid who drove a billionaire's Ferrari spread quietly through the city. People spoke about it in whispers, some in disbelief, others in admiration. To some, it was just a scandalous tale. To others, it was an inspiring reminder that true courage and kindness know no boundaries. But to Rosa, it was simply her truth. She had acted not for recognition, not for reward, but because her heart told her it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, she had changed not only Emily's life, but her own. From that day forward, Rosa was no longer just the maid in the background. She was the woman who had reminded a billionaire of what truly mattered. And though she never asked for the title, she carried it with quiet dignity, the hero who chose courage over fear, love over silence, and humanity over pride.